Gibbs about his lasting impact in the North Jersey athletics community. We're all stunned by his sudden death, passing Tuesday night. And we send out, before we start anything, we want to send out our condolences to everyone at Ramapo and everyone in the Gibbs family. We hope you know from watching us for the next 20 minutes or so how much we valued and enjoyed our time with Coach Gibbs. So I want to bring on all my friends, my aces, Mr. Schwartz, Mr. McConville, Mr. Tattaglia, Mr. Matura. Guys, it's all great to see you. I wish it was better circumstances, of course. Yeah. And I know we all have some fun stories we're going to share throughout the night. So thank you guys so much. We'll all get a chance to talk. I want to start kind of doing it a little bit chronologically. And so that means I want to talk to my friend Jim McConville, our honorary ace, who goes back with Coach Gibbs a long time. So, Jim, tell us about how your relationship with Coach Gibbs started.
So we were both Midland Park alums. I was about 7 years ahead of him. He was class of 1980. I was class of 1973. By the time he was playing in the 78 and 79 season as a varsity player, I had already started writing for the Ridgewood News. So back in that day, that was before I had done a lot of the Ridgewood beat writing. So Brian Farrell and I, another Midland Park alum, were doing a lot of the games at Midland Park. So I got the opportunity to, watch him play and in that environment. And then, there was a little bit of a gap there. But then back in 1990, as I'm now the beat writer for Ridgewood News for the Ridgewood football team, Drew comes on as an assistant coach in Ridgewood. Yeah. Part of Chuck Johnson's staff. And he was there from 1990 to 2000. So what I think a lot of people don't necessarily know is, because he's been kind of dubbed the master of the spread offense. For 10 years, he was running the wing T. The amazing thing about,
let's not forget about the wrestling coach thing too, coaching wrestling.
Oh yeah, he helped turn the Ridgewood program around. They were in, there's some struggles in the mid '90s. Just being able to get a lot of focus in the program, and he ended up turning around and turned it into a very formidable program in the in that late '90s stage before he moved on to Ramapo. But I think what makes it really interesting about Drew himself was that, he was one of the young studs on that coaching staff. Ironically, one of the other young studs on that staff was Jimmy Grasso. So, it's kind of eerie and ironic that, those two have, some kind of a legacy together. And here we are, two of the respected people that are in the Bergen County community from a coaching standpoint. But Drew had a funny story. It was there's the 1990 season. This is the year before they win the first of Ridgewood's sectional titles ever. And Chuck says to him, "Drew, you're running my offense. I'm going to take the defense. You're going to run the offense." So lo and behold, they go out and they get shut out 4 times. So Drew's coming to the end of the year and he's like, we might be good friends, but I don't know if I'm going to have a job, So the last couple of games, they got it turned around and they started to, get some scoring in and doing some things. And the next thing he says to a lot of the guys, thank you for saving my job. Now think about that. What a turn of events it would have been if there had been a couple more shutouts in there, right? Instead, but he goes on, and the amazing thing was after the 10 years at Ridgewood, we had there was a lot of good fun in there. Back in those days, being the avid Jets fan that I am, sorry about that, people, but somebody's got to do it. Being that guy, I was always very easily recognizable with like satin green jet jacket on every game. And literally up to the last couple of weeks ago when Ridgewood and Ramapo got together, the running joke with, every time I'd see him is he's go, where's the Jets jacket? We got to have the Jets jacket. So, I was going to try to break it out tonight, but I didn't know if that was going to be necessarily the right thing to do. But the interesting thing too was that once he moved on from Ridgewood and went to Ramapo, he reinvented himself. And, he went from that wing T and totally reinvented himself and made himself into an entirely different style of offense. And that speaks to the kind of person he was, but it also speaks to the kind of character he had. He was never one who would simply lead by instruction. He was somebody who led by example. He showed every one of his players all the time that you never stop being a student. And he was an absolute student of the game. To this, right? I mean, Darren, you've been there with him at different events clinics, right? Clinics. And he would be the lead speaker possibly, but he was probably more intent listening to everybody else and wanting to pick up those nuggets. Yeah. And I think that really speaks to the type of coach he was, and it also speaks to the type of person that he was and why the kids gravitated to him, because he made it very comfortable for them to feel that he wasn't any different than they were, that he was going to be there. He was learning as well as teaching. And I think that made it so much easier for him to be able to, navigate the ever-changing evolution of the football player as we've seen over the past 20 years. So, I mean, those are some of the things that that struck out at me right away. And I saw it for those 10 years at Ridgewood, so many players on that chalk talk about, a month ago that came back and were all they wanted to do was talk to him and tell him, not you've done such a great job overall, but what he did for them. And I think that's the lasting legacy. The Drew Gibbs physicality may not be here, but the Drew Gibbs legacy that lives on with the thousands of players that he coached and the thousands of players that he mentored, that's the legacy of Drew Gibbs.
Very well put, Jim. We'll come back to you in a few minutes. I want to talk to two of my other Aces friends, Greg and Greg. It was interesting doing my research yesterday into Coach Gibbs. The person who broke the news of Mr. Gibbs getting the Ramapo job is sitting right here over there. His name is Greg Matura. Greg, do you remember that at all? Do you remember a little bit about how good Ramapo was with Mielo and maybe some of the pressure Drew was under maybe taking over at Ramapo?
Well, they were quite good in the 90s. They won championships under Mike Mielo. They were very, very competitive. They and there was pressure on Drew. I actually do not remember writing that story.
We've written be honest, out, yeah.
I remember more of the last several years, but I'm scheduled to cover the game against Northern Highlands, their Northland Group 4 championship game, and I'm not ready to be at the game and not see him there. It's going to be difficult for me to process. I think over the last 4 or 5 years, I've probably covered as many Ramapo football games as anyone. I think what I'm going to remember about him, additionally, is that he just has so much class and dignity. I think back to more of the games that he's lost and the gentleman that he's been. I was there earlier this season when they suffered their only loss at Ridgewood, 47-42. He stands on the field like a gentleman and answers all of our questions. I was there last year when they had their state record 30-something game state leading record streak broken in the final couple minutes against Riverdale, and he was a gentleman after that, and just a pleasure to cover him, win or lose. And of course, there was a lot more winning than losing there with the back-to-back 13-0 seasons in 2018 and 2019. So he's done more than his share of winning, as Jim referenced so well before. He did so many positive things, had so much of a positive impact on so many kids, and he leaves an incredible legacy.
All right, Mr. Tartaglia, you must have similar kind of stories about talking to Drew after games. Was always interesting, and always, he would answer your questions. He would talk to you. He would give you insights. He would ask you questions too about, what did you think? What did you see? So give our audience some insights about working with Drew Gibbs.
Well, there were a few years in a row where I actually wrote the state of the program for Ramapo. And I think the first year I did it, I was asking about expectations, and he's talking to me about expectations never change. And so kind of evolved over the next few years. I'm like, I'm not going to ask him what the expectations are because I know, how can I kind of sort of frame it in a little bit different way? And he was very good with the media. I'm very happy, also feel privileged that I got to talk to him at the Super Football Conference Media Day. We had a conversation, it was a 20-year anniversary of 9/11. That was his first season at Ramapo. That was my first season covering high school football at all. I was at WGHT, and the radio days were a little different than the writing days. But one thing is, he was always good with the camera or a mic in his face, and he taught that to his players too. It was. I interviewed the gamut from all over North Jersey for the radio, but the Ramapo players were always prepared. They knew what to say. Even if it was like a Derek Jeter type quote where you say something but you don't really say anything, they got it. And so, and I know he was a great football coach and a great teacher. He was a great mentor in that sort of way. And I got to know him a little bit more as I went on and worked as a sports editor of Suburban News, which covers basically all the towns that Ramapo sends, the towns that sends kids to Ramapo, covers Midland Park, which is where he grew up. I got my Midland Park football archives. If you ask me, I could probably call up in a couple seconds what his stats were from his senior year. But it was while I was at the Suburban News, I covered the 2015 team, and he had mentioned a couple times before, they always ended up somehow with a pineapple at their sectional championship game. And so I was like, I'm going to make this into a sidebar. There it is. And so I asked him, where did this start from? The fact that picture got on the front of the record, I thought was absolutely amazing. He said he didn't know how it started. He told me he wasn't the one who started it, but it happens every year that when they get to usually a sectional final, and in case 2018 was a regional final, a pineapple just shows up out of nowhere, and they pass it around, post-game celebration. I wrote they pass it around like a Stanley Cup. They really do. And everybody takes a bite, and Drew would take a bite of it too. And it was one of those really cool, team building things. He built the team long before that, but it was one of those neat little twists that he wasn't, as serious a football coach as he was. I looked at him as, you mentioned, Darren, how much he liked to learn. He learned from the best coaches. He studied guys like Bill Belichick and things like that. But he still had that, streak of he knew how to have fun. And so I remember, I looked it up today, but I remember at the end of the article, he said, as long as I'm the head coach at Ramapo High School, there will always be a pineapple on sectional championship day. And so, it kind of hits me a little bit different now, but at the same time, I think, I have no doubt there's going to be a pineapple show up somewhere. And
God, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So
they may all come with pineapple.
Yes, that's right. I think that now it will be, how many we can spot. But to lose Drew and Jim mentioned working at the Ridgewood News. When I was working there, I learned about what he did with wrestling. I met Tori. I was there when Tori Watson became the Ridgewood wrestling coach. He talked about what a mentor Coach Gibbs was. And so he, all these, it's funny, all these towns where I grew up in, he had the same kind of impact too. And as I was looking back, I saw a couple of, and we lost him too a couple of weeks ago. It's been a rough couple of weeks for the Aces. We just said goodbye to Ron Fox. I was looking to see if he had any Fox's Lair stories on Coach Gibbs. And I don't think he ever really wrote about Midland Park because coworker Brian Farrell and of course Jim were the ones that covering the Panthers, those Parkers back then. But it's, I got to admit, wherever he's now, I'm sure he's in some good company.
Thank you so much, Greg. You're watching the Varsity Aces show. It's a special tribute edition to Ramapo football coach Drew Gibbs, who passed away tragically and suddenly on Tuesday. Once again, we want to send out our condolences to his family and tell our audience, if you don't know, that services are on Saturday in Wyckoff. All that's on our Twitter handle. And the football game between Ramapo and Northern Highlands has officially been moved to next Friday, the 26th, at Northern Highlands at 6:15 p.m. I want to bring on the veteran, the ace of all aces, my friend, Mr. Paul Schwartz. And Schwartz, you and I talked a lot yesterday. The story I want you to tell, though, and there's other story, is, Mr. Schwartz, if you don't know, lives sometimes up here and lives sometimes in South Carolina, and just by sheer happenstance happened to be in North Jersey last week and happens to cover Ramapo's football game on Friday night, and it ends up being Drew Gibbs' last game. I don't know how much of our audience will think that that's really cool, but there's nobody who's seen more North Jersey sports than Paul Schwartz, and he has, now we can say, unfortunately, in a way, that he got a chance, just kind of kismet that he was at Drew Gibbs' last game. And this is a funny story. We don't want this all to be sad. And you told him his last call was a crummy call, didn't you, Mr. Schwartz?
Yes, I did. We flew up Saturday. We flew up Friday morning, and in the meetings, I've been working from down in South Carolina, and we spend part of the year up here. But I've continued to keep my hands in whatever. But I haven't done a lot of football in the last few years, and I knew this was a big Friday night and Saturday, and I covered cross country Saturday, the state championships as whatever, and I got permission from the mistress of the house, my wife Wendy, to cover the football game Friday night. And in the meeting, Ramapo was available, and I said, "Can I go to Ramapo?" My kid went to Ramapo. Drew moved to town basically around the time we did. I wanted to cover Ramapo. And of course, I got a chance to, and had a great time. I got there early, got there 5:45, sat in the parking lot and had a sandwich from the market basket for dinner, and walked in as they were warming up. There was nobody else but the two teams on the field, and I had no interest in Ridge, no disrespect to Ridge, but I was writing Ramapo win, lose, draw, or multiple overtimes, and Drew's out in the middle of the field, and I walk out, big smile. I hadn't seen him in person probably in 6 or 7 years. And we chatted about a whole bunch of things before the game, including the fact that, he said Ridge is going to run the ball, and they're going to, they're not, the quarterback's going to go left, right, all over the place. And of course he did. And, we talked about his team. I knew his quarterback. I had met his quarterback last spring, who was a terrific track kid, Jack Gresser, and really got to spend some time with him last year, but obviously not last night until after Friday night until after the game. And we just chatted. And then I'd spend half the game on one sideline, half the game on the other sideline. Not interested. It's Ridge Ramapo. I'm staying with Ramapo. And got to watch Drew Gibbs, who prepared as well as any coach I've ever seen in any sport. He had his play sheet in his hand. He let his players play, as you say, Darren, all the time. He let his coaches coach, and he sort of supervised. And I saw him before the game talking to a number 9. The boy's last name is Primo, a sophomore, who ended up catching 2 long bombs, one for a touchdown that iced the game, and another one for a long game that set up a touchdown. And he said to him, and I thought it was kind of strange because he's listed as a quarterback of the program, "I know you're ready. I know you're ready. We're counting on you to be ready." I had no idea what it was. And obviously he had this play. I guess the kid had gotten in and scored a touchdown against Ridgewood in a similar play. And sure enough, the kid was ready. But how ironic it is that after this unbelievable Hall of Fame legendary career, and by the way, there's a movement already to name the field after him, and I guarantee you that's going to happen sometime in the next year. There's no way it doesn't. But they're up 41-24. There's a minute to go in a game. They're 4th and whatever on their own 20-yard line. Ridge is out of timeouts. Punt the ball. Let him throw a couple of passes. The game's over. He calls timeout, and they line up, and instead of the punter being in the game, Jack Gresser's back there to pooch kick. And he pooch kicks, and it's the worst pooch kick in the history of pooch kicks. It comes off the side of his foot, it bounces once, and this big lineman picks it up on the dead run, goes 20 yards for a touchdown. Obviously, then Ridge tries a bunch of onside kicks. They're awful. One's a penalty on them. One's a penalty on Ramapo. Finally, he kicks it out of bounds. They run the victory formation, and they win the game. So he goes through. I go over, congratulate him. I tell him, I say to him, boy, what a perfect game, because it had been a little bit of a sloppy fourth quarter. It was a very strange fourth quarter. And Drew said it was the strangest one he'd ever coached. And I said, well, it's perfect. You won. You really weren't in jeopardy of losing, and you have a lot to talk about. And he said, sure do. We have to improve everything to beat Northern Highlands. So we go through the interview. We chat a little bit. And I turn the tape recorder off, and I say to him, what was that last call? And he starts to say to me, well, Jack has the best leg on the team. And I give him a look, and he looks back and he says, look, we're all entitled to make a mistake once in a while. And, I just find it ironic that this genius of a football coach, he really was, not so much in just the way he handled things. His last call, other than the victory formation, was this weird pooch punt that blew up, but obviously it was more of an anomaly than anything else. But it brings to another story. Now, again, I didn't cover a lot of his games, but I saw a lot of his games because his kids, his two oldest, and my child were both at Ramapo at the same time, and lived in Wyckoff. And I had first met and spent time with Drew when we both were rec coaches in town. I don't even remember what sport. And of the 8 rec coaches in town, the only 2 who were involved in sports as part of our lives were he and I. And the only 2 who got it were he and I. We were there to teach the 10 and 11-year-olds to love the game, to enjoy the game, to learn the game. And everybody else was trying to figure out how you could win. And I always loved the couple of times I coached against him. It was the most enjoyable I had because we were both trying to do the same thing. Yeah, we wanted to win, but it was more important that our kids had fun and learned how to play. So then my kid's in a marching band. So as a good parent, Friday night, thank goodness for Friday Night Football, we'd go to the game and Wendy would watch the band and I'd watch the band. I also watched the football game. And they're playing Pascack Valley when Craig Nielsen was there and PV was at its best for that time period around. And those games were always good games. Everybody talks about Ramapo Wayne Hills, but for a couple of years, Ramapo Pascack Valley was great. And I'm sitting in the stands and it's a close game. And it's Pascack Valley is going to punt from its 10-yard line. And I look and I see Drew on the sidelines make a little bit of a gesture. And I'll show. He makes a little bit of a gesture to his punt returner to move him about 5 yards to the left right before the kick comes as the ball's being snapped. The kid moves. Sure enough, the ball is kicked right to him. He catches it on a dead run, goes 50 yards for a touchdown, and they go on to win the game. And I turned to the guy next to me. I don't even remember who it was. I said, "That's a football coach." And I'm staggered by his loss. I'm staggered by the fact. I'm glad I was able to be there. I wish he'd coached for another 50 years, and I could have been there too. But just a great loss. To his family, of course, to the community, of course, to the football community, and to North Jersey. Just an absolutely incredible loss of a wonderful human being whose legacy will live on much longer than any of ours.
Thank you so much, Schwab. Guys, you all spoke so eloquently. I really appreciate everything that you said. I hope, again, the audience kind of understands how much we enjoyed our time with Coach Gibbs. I'll just go around one last time. Jim, what do you think the scene will be like next Friday night at this football game between Ramapo and Highlands?
I think it will be a very crowded place.
Yeah.
Anybody who's going better get there about 1 o'clock.
Yeah.
But I think it's going to be a bit somber for some, but I'll probably find my way there. And I have to tell you, I would be surprised if that team doesn't come out and espouse their coach, that they do it as if he was standing right there, because I think in their mind, he's going to be standing right there with them. And I can absolutely see that the only thing that's going to be on their mind for that hour, 2 hours, 2 hours and 10 minutes maybe, is going to be winning the game, because I think it was Robbie Travers who said it. He already laid us the blueprint. We just have to go out and do it. And if there's ever an individual tribute, that's what all you have to do is listen to his players, and they're going to do something that, I don't think a lot of people will believe that they can do, but I think they're going to do something. And the atmosphere will be, during the game, electric. I think before will be somber. During the game, electric, and then after the game, win, lose, or draw. Again, I think there's going to be a sadness because he wasn't there to be part of it. And it's going to take a while for people to get over the idea that he's not there.
And thank you, Jim. And Greg, kind of a different question though, but like, any like final thoughts, just, what Drew Gibbs embodied and personified for the North Jersey athletic community. Class, right? I think of class, right?
Yeah, and he was known by so many. I was at the Waldwick soccer game the other night, and they had a moment of silence for him. Like, to the community, he meant so. To the communities, in this area, he meant so much. And one of my neighbors actually played football for him. Casey Culinary ended up being a big lineman for him, and so like people around the town, they knew about Ramapo football. And that was because of him. That was because of the program that he put together and, the way he ran the show. And it's like Jim said, I was talking to Tori Watson the other day, I had heard Monday night that Drew went into the hospital, and I'm thinking to myself, oh, okay, it's never great, but like, modern medicine and everything, it's these days we're almost kind of surprised when people don't pull through. And that's one of the reasons it was so shocking. But one of the other things Tori said to me was that he always remembered the smile. Every single time Drew Gibbs saw him, gave him the smile, shook his hand. And Paul said the same thing earlier, and I could see the face. Even now, I just know that, even if it wasn't the best circumstances, or even if I had written or said something a little silly, like, he'd still give you the smile, real great firm handshake.
And how about you, Mr. Ventura? How would you sum up Drew Gibbs' impact on the North Jersey sports world?
It was huge. I'm going to have to harken back. I covered a situation like this in 1990. What's considered by many to be the greatest high school football game in New Jersey history. Randolph versus Montclair. Again, December 1st, 1990. Randolph coach John Bauer Sr. passed away in November. He was replaced by his son, John Jr. They played at Montclair. Montclair was ranked number 6 in the country by USA Today. Randolph had an incredible stretch. They had won 48 games in a row. Randolph kicked a field goal on the final play of the game. It was a controversial finish, but they won 22-21. And Mike Rowe, who kicked the field goal, said that he thought that Bauer Sr. was looking down on them and watching the game. I'm getting the chills just thinking about that. But
yeah, I thank you, Greg. Thank you, Schwa. I'll end with you. Like, we're so lucky, aren't we, that we get to be part of this and we get to meet people like this, right? I mean, that I'm sure that thought had to occur to all of us the last 24 hours. Of, boy, we are sad. We are all sad. But there's got to be a part of it that feels fortunate to have known Coach Gibbs and been along the ride. My story was getting, hit with the Gatorade shower, next to him in 2000. That's me over there in the blue sweater and the ugly pleated pants. That's the only time I ever got hit by a Gatorade shower before. They'd won a championship game beating Sparta. So we're really fortunate, aren't we, Schwa? I mean, we don't, right?
We really are. And I'm thinking, I know Greg Russo wouldn't agree with this, but I'm thinking of what Jim said at the beginning of this part of it. This is the game that should be in Giant Stadium. Regionals can't be in Giant Stadium because it's going to be the following week. But if there was ever a call to move a semifinal game on Friday night to Giant Stadium, I think they'd get a great attendance. I think it would be a tribute to North Jersey football and to Drew. I know it's not going to happen, but,
it's not the worst idea in the world, though. It's not a terrible idea.
I mean, again, it's a game now. Even if you had no interest, this show is supposed to be half tonight about cross country, the state cross country championships on Saturday. And I was going to have Angelina Perez of Lakeland and Remy Duback of Clifton, who I don't know if they know a football from a basketball. And when I told both of them that we were doing this and said, they both responded that they had heard about it and how awful it was and their wishes to the family. So that tells you what kind of a a factor Drew Gibbs was in this community, not just a football coach.
All right, Aces, I want to thank you all so much for spending some time tonight. Thank our audience here. This is NorthJersey.com. I'm Darren Cooper. Usually I close the show with kind of a witty phrase, but in tribute to Coach Gibbs, I think we're going to use one of his lines that the Aces tonight, we do what we do. And so we honor Coach Gibbs. Again, we send out our condolences to him and his family and everyone in the Ramapo athletics community. Thank you so much for watching. This is NorthJersey.com.